social media enhances it enhances conviviality enormously. Suddenly you're in touch with people from high school, relatives you haven't seen in a long time. And I thought it retrieved gossip. Gossip was enormous there. In fact, it is about gossip. And gossip, as Yuval Noah Harari points out in his book 'Sapiens, I think is the most important thing in his book. And it's speculative. He thinks human beings are built for gossip. In our early, our early days as a sentient and nomadic species, we needed to know, who are the good ones at making tools, who are the ones that will screw you over, which were the ones that climb trees, whatever else it was. And gossip was good for that, and it retrieved gossip in a huge way.
Author, journalist, and fellow podcaster Doc Searles joins John and Scoop on the Plutopia podcast. We discuss social media's impact on the internet, mass media's changes in the digital age, streaming music, movies, and much more.
Just go for it.
Hey, Doc.
Hey, man. Hey, men. Is this the planet Plutopia?
Planet Plutopia.
I bring greetings from Earth. so, Scoop, are you? That's what it says here. Are you related by aspiration or something to Scoop Nisker by any chance?
Only by first name. We're all related to Senator Jackson. I met Nisker a few times when I lived for 40 years out in the Bay Area. And
oh, really? Wow.
I did news out there, but mine was radio print news for Zodiac News Service. So, we encountered each other.
He used to be on KFOG there, back when KFOG existed.
Yeah, and KSAN, in the early days.
Oh, he's in KSAN before that. Yeah.
He used to do those great news collages.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and he always ended with, if you don't like the news, go out and make some of your own, which is one of my favorite one-liners, So
I corresponded with him once, but it was about Buddhism. It wasn't about journalism. He's a Vipassana practitioner, or was back then.
So what's up, guys? What are we doing here? I'm glad to do anything.
Will you sing? Never mind.
I could.
We can drop that.
I could. It would not be a kind thing, though.
Well, we can start with just a huge question, and that is, what has the internet done to media?
That's of course the McLuhan question, which if he was here, he would be asking and not answering directly, but asking lots of questions about it. And
the tetrad.
And his tetrad, where he would take it in 4 directions. And a little story about that. Somebody asked me, what the hell ever happened to blogging? Because blogging was like a huge thing, and then it went away. It didn't go away completely because nothing ever does. And I thought, okay, well, let's run it through the tetrad. So McLuhan said a tetrad is a group of 4. And he said that there are 4 heuristics, 4 questions, which are, what does a new medium enhance, retrieve, obsolesce, and reverse or flip into, meaning what bad stuff comes out. And I thought, okay, well, clearly blogging got obsolesced in a way. So, and what gets obsolesced also gets retrieved. But I thought what happened was, it would happen with social media, because there are so many people I knew that were really great bloggers. They're on my blog roll, and all of a sudden they're over there. And they included some, Chris Locke, who is my co-writer, Ewan Semple, many others, that were great bloggers. And then suddenly they're over on Facebook and they're on Twitter. In fact, Dave Weiner, whose command I obey for everything he suggests, said you have to get on Twitter like on day 2, saying it. And I asked Weiner, he says, because it's important. It's not that anything else. It's important. You have to be there because it's important. And then a lot of energy went into that as well. Almost everybody seemed to get that. And I had, like something like 20,000 subscribers to RSS feeds. And I had, many dozens of thousands sometimes of readers a day, like in 03, 04, 5, 6. And that just went gone. I mean, a lot of it just disappeared. And so I thought, but what happened with social media? 2006, 2007, social media happened.
Yeah.
So I thought, okay, well, social media is doing this, and social media enhances um, it, it enhances conviviality enormously. Suddenly, you're in touch with people from high school, relatives you haven't seen in a long time, um, and I thought it retrieved gossip. Gossip was enormous there. In fact, it is about gossip, and gossip, as um, Yuval Noah Harari points out in his book *Sapiens*, I think is most important thing in his book, and it's speculative. He thinks human beings are built for gossip. In our early, um, our early days as ascension and nomadic species, we needed to know, who are the good ones at making tools, who are the ones that will screw you over, who were the ones that climb trees, whatever else it was, and gossip was good for that, and it retrieved gossip in a huge way. It certainly obsolesced blogging, and it reversed, and I think this is the most important thing in a way, into tribalism. And algorithmic nudging pushed us into tribes, especially, and it but what I saw, this, and this is where we're going to get to what it does to us. It what what social media did to blogging, it actually did to all of journalism, and it did it by making everybody a journalist. Everybody's in a position to be a journalist. The FBI is just swimming in journalistic data about January 6th, a lot of it done by people who were there, and uh, we would not have had George Floyd except for the fact that somebody stood there and filmed all that and was a journalist in a literal sense doing that. It's a different world because of that, but it's not just, I mean, it wasn't just the journalism as we knew it got obsolesced, and that reversed into a kind of not so much chaos, but just an overabundance of stuff. But it wasn't just social media, it was all of digital. I mean, I think the most important thing about our time, and it's very hard to get any distance on, we can get distance on radio and print and scribing and other things and speech, but we're pickled in the internet now. We live here. We are digital beings, us with each other right now. And I know you're in Austin, Scoop. I'm not sure where you are. It
Close
actually
by.
does. You where?
He's close by. He's
He's close by.
in the
You're both in
Bastrop
Austin.
area. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but it doesn't matter. I mean, we're all on the internet, and on is not even, it's a convenient preposition, but the only preposition in the roster of maybe 50, 60 prepositions in the English language that applies is with. We're all with each other. We're present digitally with each other, and we can hear each other and see each other and interact with each other, but we're not on anything. We're not even perceptively anyway. We're not even through, or it most all of the prepositions we have in the world are positional, over, under, beside, around, through, within. They're they're part of how we make sense of the physical world. This is a new world, as my wife Joyce points out. It's one without distance and without gravity and without, for the most part, cost. We're not None of us worried about what this was going to cost us before we got on this call, right? I mean, it just, there it is. I mean, we're aware overall, okay, there's hosting service costs that, and I've subscribed to these different things, but for
The
the most
incremental
part,
cost is fairly low.
yeah, I mean, it's low enough not to worry about. It's like a drive
Yeah.
to the store. I'm not going to run out of gas when I go to the store. But anyway, I mean, I think that what's going on is we're being remade in a lot of ways by being digital, not just by being on the internet, but by being digital beings. I have, it's stuck in my pocket, so it'll be hard to get out, but I can. So I've got one of these. We've all got one of these, and this is, I can't be without this. This is part of my body. This is my phone. For those of you who might be listening and not looking, um, the phone is an extension of me, and that's another thing McLuhan says, that every medium, and by which he means actually every technology, extends us. We're enlarged by it. The shirt I'm wearing is an extension of my skin. The my glasses, an extension of my eyes. When you're driving a car, you think of my fenders and my wheels and my engine, as if they're parts of you. A pilot may think of my wings and my rudder. Um, our senses extend outward. This is something that Michael Polanyi, a physicist uh, and a philosopher, talked about, that we do through a process called indwelling. We dwell in the things that we have and that extend us in different ways. And our senses are like that. Other animals aren't quite like that. I mean, a crow can, get a stick and push it in a hole, but human beings make tools, they make all kinds of stuff, and they all extend us. And we're extended in new ways we're barely beginning to comprehend, I don't think. And I also think it's early, really early. I think we're 25 years into this thing, really. That's about it, since we had ISPs and the commercial internet. And we'll be like this for how many, not just dozens more years, but thousands more years. We're not
Yeah,
going
we're
to get
just
rid of
starting to get
digital.
to the really hard parts,
Yeah.
where we
Yeah.
really have to
It
figure out
is the
how to
hard
make
part
it
now.
work.
Well,
Right.
Doc, let me reverse John's question on you.
Sure.
What has the media done to the internet?
I think it got absorbed. I think they all got absorbed. And I think I mean, obviously you can, I mean, it's sort of interesting to me that let me go back a little further. In the late 90s, when Microsoft bought something called Web TV, um, the idea behind Web TV, it was an independent company, a startup, was that you can get the internet on a TV, and you would put TV on the internet, and so you could take your low def PAL or NTSC television with that you looked at on a tube, and you could put the internet on that, which is just in retrospect, a ludicrous idea. And Microsoft bought them for what was at the time like $325 million, and it was a gigantic purchase at that time. It's pocket change now, but for a purchase of a startup, but it was a monstrous amount of money at the time. Um, and everybody wondered, well, oh, that means the TV is going to eat the web. And a guy named Dave Feinlieb, who worked for Microsoft at the time, approached me and said, because I wrote something saying, all of a sudden everybody's saying that TV is going to eat the web and it's going to go the other way. The web is going to eat TV, and the internet's going to eat TV. TV will totally become part of that. And he wanted me to write a chapter for a book that they were putting together, because he had an anthology of opinions, mostly from people in the industry, in the TV industry, but also in the tech industry, about what web TV and stuff like web TV were going to do to the internet now that TV has gotten the clues about the internet. And I was the only one who said it's not going to go, the TV is not going to eat the web at all. It's going to go the other way. And that's exactly what happened. I think I worked for a number of years in radio. I've been in publishing all my life in one way or another. I've been a freelancer, an employed writer. I've done a lot of photography. And I've just watched every one of those things get totally absorbed. I mean, Linux Journal, which I was an editor for 24 years, stopped publishing in print and went entirely online. Uh, uh, and I think that, I mean, look at what's happened to TV news. I mean, there isn't any anymore. There's a half hour of general stuff on the evenings on network TV, but who watches much network TV anymore? I mean, even with radio, which I dearly love, and I have always paid great attention, especially to the engineering side of it, but the programming side as well. It used to be we'd turn on the radio in the morning in the kitchen, and we'd listen to the NPR station, and we get the morning news that way. And now my wife and I both circulate in the kitchen with our headphones on, listening to podcasts. Some of those podcasts are, you know, the New York Times, the Daily, and the NPR has an Up First thing that's kind of a compression of their morning show. We might listen to that, or we might listen to some longer form thing. But what what we both can do is we can listen to it at 1.5 speed. We can also rewind. We can skip over the promos and other stuff like that. You can't do that with regular old radio. And I'm just watching radio. It's kind of like you dropped ink into a water and it diffuses. It becomes part of the water, but it's no longer an independent thing. Same thing with television. I mean, television has been absorbed by the rectangle. We're living in rectangles now, and television is one of the things in those rectangles. Um, you know, we watch approximately zero over the air network TV either, but but like the last couple nights we binged on something called The Great, which is on Hulu, which we got for $6.99 for 1 month, and then we kind of packed it all in on the last day before we canceled. Um, and that, uh, it wasn't all, actually The Great wasn't all that great, but we binge watched that. But even there, like that's a movie on the beginning of the reign of Catherine the Great. And if you read about Catherine the Great, the Russian empress, a piece of work doesn't cover her. You're going to need a 3-year series to go into all the stuff that she did and all the differences she made in the world. Just a remarkable life. I mean, I sat there reading about her life because of the show, which is much more interesting, frankly, than the show was, I thought. But we're not watching regular old TV. Regular old TV is just kind of like, it's not going away, but it's getting absorbed. And we're only at the beginning of, how do you tell a story? I mean, something I'm wondering about, and I'm wondering out loud to no effect whatsoever, but that's okay, about the role of the story itself. Human beings are deeply interested in stories, but stories make news. The most common thing you'll hear in a newsroom, where they still exist, is what's the story? And stories all have 3 parts. They have character, problem, and movement toward a resolution. If you're missing one of those things, it's not a story. So how much doesn't get told? How much doesn't interest people because it doesn't fit that format? And what happens when you have a character who's so interesting that you can't ignore them? We had a president for 4 years who was one of those. And he completely and utterly changed the media landscape because he was all story all the time. And as soon as the media decided we don't like that storyteller anymore, they canceled his ass. And the whole, it's an amazing, we'll look back on that as one of the most important moments in the history of culture. Like the day that social media canceled Trump. Wow. And I was greatly relieved, but on the other hand, was it right? Was it wrong? You can make cases in both directions, but how are you going to frame that up? It's really hard. But the truth is that he was like the mule in the Foundation series by Asimov, a guy who can manipulate people's emotions, and changed history because he could do that, and Asimov wrote that like in his 20s and the early 50s, which is an amazing thing. But that's, how do we get distance on any of this stuff? It's really, really hard. But anyway, the answer to your question is that the internet's eating all of it.
Well, you mentioned radio, and we both have a past history of that. Yeah. And John and I have resurrected our radio interest with a weekly show on one of my internet radio stations. I got involved with internet streaming music back in the late 90s and have continued all along with a couple of internet radio stations, as have many ex-radio folks who were done away with by people like Rush Limbaugh, who took over AM radio and all that.
Yeah, he did.
But the people are still around, and they're still trying to do what they used to do, only on the internet. But funny thing happened. Suddenly, the big guys, Google, Apple, and all that bunch, discovered that they can make money streaming music and charging people for it. And all of a sudden, they declared war on the internet broadcasters. Apple deleted all of the internet broadcast links from iTunes when they started Apple Music, and you're seeing that happen.
Is that true? Because I
Absolutely.
So the directory the directory they had of all the internet radio stations went away.
Yeah, well, pretty much
it did. But what they replaced it with was their own radio stations,
something called radio. Yeah, they've had that.
Yeah,
for
they
years.
refer to it as radio, and it might be like there's a John Lebkowski radio that I can stream that is based on my interests. So it's sort of like
Yeah.
their genius concept applied to all the stuff that I play, and it's pretty great, And I could listen to that and not anything else. And I think that's kind of what's happened is that those kinds of things where the curation is closer to home.
Yeah. Um, well, that's one more reason for me not to upgrade to Catalina or Big Sur on my Mac because, um, I mean, I'm not doing it mostly because I do photography and there's like a 10-year-old program that Microsoft had briefly and then killed off, but it still works on a 32-bit operating system. And it's a way of organizing photos that has no equal and will not work on the new operating system. So I'm not doing that. But I'm sad to hear that because that was a really great thing that they just kept burying it deeper and deeper in iTunes.
Yeah.
Originally, it was just
But the
called
people
Internet
are,
Radio.
the stations
Yeah,
are still out there, and
they are, and there's
there's
some great
thousands of
ones.
them, and they're a lot of them are the old radio professionals who just said, well, screw
Right.
it. They won't hire me, so I'll just do it because I love to do the music and the talk. I mean, it's not just, music all the time. There are plenty of talks radio stations out there on the internet.
Right. Look,
Podcasts are being broadcast on the internet radio stations as kind of their public service.
yeah. Well, that's what my Twit podcast does. It's they're like a TV network. They're 24/7 and they have programs and you can listen to them or watch them live and then you get them as a podcast later and they're mostly consumed as podcasts actually. Um, but to go back to what happened in a kind of order, um, the old record industry saw internet streaming, which they called webcasting back in the 90s, as a threat. And when the DMCA was written and passed in October 18th, I think it was 8th or 18th of 1998, giving us Section 230 and many other things. But um, it basically left um, negotiating rates for playing music um, up to the stations, and they didn't settle it. But then what happened was a series of things. The Copyright Arbitration Royalty Panel, CARP, which originally was called Copyright Royalty Arbitration Panel until they discovered it said crap. Um, and they would negotiate rates with the webcasters, which at that time included one guy named Bill Goldsmith. He was at KPIG and the first commercial station to go on the internet in the Monterey Bay region in Freedom, California, and uh, and Bill now runs Radio Paradise. He's still on the air. He has his own music station. It's terrific at radioparadise.com. And he was one of the people who negotiated with them. And I covered it a lot for Linux Journal in the early aughts, the whole fight that went on there. And they had rates that basically required that stations keep track of everything that they played, and they paid, fractions of a penny per song. And then there were carve outs for like like college stations and for NPR affiliate or Corporation for Public Broadcasting funded stations. They had to carve out in a certain rate that wasn't published, but allowed them to operate. But if you had running a podcast, you had to clear rights for everything you did, and which was impossible. And one of the reasons why, and nobody sees this as a fossil remnant of that, because there was never any compulsory licensing, there was never an agreement between the Worldwide Association of Podcasters and the record companies on rates for playing music on your podcast. Podcaster all talk. Here we are, right? I mean, I have music on my own. I have a second podcast we do with Catherine Druckman and my good friends at Two Cows, Hover and Ting, kindly got me the rights to a piece of music that I absolutely love, that I heard first on KPIG. That that cost like $600. That was the only piece of music I've ever seen that happen with, and it took months. So that's why we don't have music on podcasts. But in the meantime, what happened after that was that for internet radio was that Spotify came along and came up with its own, got big enough so it came up with its own agreement with the record companies where the rates are far worse for the artists than they are anywhere else. And Apple has a similar thing. All the giants have agreements like this. It's a perfect example of everything is right and wrong about giants. On the right side, they can give John, algorithmically music that it discovers that he likes of some kind of various kinds. And on the downside, they've got a giant way to fuck all the artists in the world because they're running it through their own giant private sphincters that are very easy to use. Um,
I wonder about that though, because I keep hearing artists complain about how little money they're getting for their music. But my recollection is that in the era of recorded music, artists were being screwed all the time by the record companies, and
they've
that they
always been
weren't
screwed.
getting that much money then either. Are they really getting that much less now?
Oh yes.
Yeah, they are on a per play
I'm a
basis.
royalty owner for a album that came out in the 80s, and it's a lot less. And
Yeah,
I
I
have
mean, I
many
mean,
friends who said the same thing.
if
Hmm.
you're, I'll just make up a false fact here. Somebody can check me on it, but I think somebody like Little Eva for Locomotion or something like that got paid like, you know, uh, for recording it in the studio and never saw another dime and ended up working in a diner until she died or something like that. There are endless stories like that from the old record business, and and from the new record business, even the stars. Look at um what's her name? Oh God, she's the biggest star there is, but she's re-recording
Taylor
all of it.
Swift.
Taylor Swift, yeah. She's re-recording all her music because she didn't like the last deal she got. She's going to do it all over again. Um, that's pretty smooth. I mean, and she's powerful, right? And she's still, over a barrel in some ways, I suppose. Um, I want to, and this is a bit of a subject shift, but this is where I tend to come from on everything these days. I want to fix this from the user side. I want to fix this from the customer side. I want to fix it from our side. What is it? What is it that we'd like to do? I mean, so I made a suggestion in Linux Journal a long time ago, um, and at Project VRM, the project I'm still running at the Berkman Center at Harvard, which is really at there in the sense it's on their servers, um, not physically there. Uh, we came up with an idea called Emancipate. Emancipate is what would happen if any of us could pay whatever we want, however we want, for whatever we want. So let's say, for example, if I had something, say on my Apple Watch, here's an Apple Watch. I've got one of these, which I got mostly to watch my heart because it's the only thing that does that. But um, I'm fine, by the way. It's just that it's a matter of curiosity. And my cardiologist said, I'd like to see what's going on with you. Get an Apple Watch.
Yeah, I'm
Um,
doing the same thing.
yeah, it's pretty damn cool, actually. So even to the point where he says, no, we're not going to do a cardiogram this time because I can just look at your watch, or I can look at your phone and see what your watch says and see whether or not there's anything irregular there. And I'll save, Medicare $200 for that, for the EKG. Anyway, so, but what if on my watch, it's noticing all the music I'm actually hearing and it's doing a Shazam kind of thing. Apple owns Shazam now. um, it could be doing it with Shazam, where over the course of a day, whether I'm standing in an elevator and hearing some jazz, or I'm at the dentist's office and I'm hearing some classical, or if I'm um, listening to the radio as I'm driving down the road, or I'm hearing a collection of things on Spotify or on Sirius XM, which I subscribe to. Um, and it keeps track of them and it gives me a list at the end of the day. And I say, you know what? I want to pay a penny a song. Every time I hear a song that I like, or I go back and say, I didn't like that one, I did like, but let's say just everyone I like, just as a matter of policy, as a listener, I think it's worth it to me to pay a penny a song to everybody whose music I hear. And that's what Emancipate would do. And that just gives me the option to do that. And that money could go to Sound Exchange, which is the society for distributing money to artists that was set up in order to deal with the webcasting world. So um, that's a solution from our side. And by the way, that's a gigantic multiple of what the people on Spotify are getting right now. I mean, what if everybody had on their personal device something that's listening to all the music they're hearing and can pay the artist for that? You can think of all kinds of interesting things if you start from the individual rather than always starting from the big thing. My belief about this is what everybody's wringing their hands over right now. It used to be, remember when a platform meant that was, the Linux platform or the Microsoft platform or the Apple platform, operating systems and stuff like that. Well, now it means a technical giant, a feudal castle in which we are forced to live, such as such as Apple's music system, or any of the, or Netflix, or or Amazon, some habitat that you have to be in that is a giant, and the government wants to break them up now, or people in the government want to break them up. And I'm not sure there's a jeweler who can, stab that thing and stab those jewels, which really aren't, and get the right thing out of them. I think they're all doomed. Why are they doomed? Because we can do better. That's industrial model stuff. I mean, it's like ever since industry won the Industrial Revolution back in the age of railroads, and since Victorian times, um, we've imagined that the world has to be run by big companies. I think we have the internet now. We don't have to have that. It's the easy thing to do. And then if you're a VC, I want a unicorn. I want something that's going to make me $10 billion when I sell it off or I take it public. That's an inherently, that's a useful system, but it's kind of not so much broken. I don't like that term, because if something's broken, it doesn't work, but it does work. But it's flawed in the sense that we can do better than that. We can do better than that if we imagine, wow, what if all the signaling we could possibly do from demand to supply was much richer than it is now, where what I want, or what I'm willing to do, or what I'm involved with, or and the rest of it, I'm in charge of in ways that are efficient and helpful. So I just think there are all kinds of things that are possible there. I think, and music is one of the things I'd like to solve early on, because it is so dysfunctional. It's just dysfunctional in brand new ways, whereas dysfunctional in the old record company way, 30 years ago.
The COVID shutdown created a lot of interesting musical trends. The individual artist web streams, live streams,
Yeah.
of their music, and I've watched a lot of that, and it gave me hope. I don't know that it can continue on post COVID, but it indicates that there are other ways of doing it that don't require the involvement of the bigs, the big record companies, the big internet companies. There are people out there that are quite proficient at providing entertainment, and then just comes from their own studios.
Yeah, I think it's fabulous. And I think I think that's one of the great trends that we have. I mean, one of my favorite one-liners that ceased to be valid came from one of the great comedians, Alan King, or one of those, back in the early 80s. In the early 80s, suddenly there was this blooming of comedy clubs everywhere. It's just this explosion of comedy clubs that suddenly opened up. And he said something like, 20 years ago, there were 100 comedians and 5 of them were good. Now there are 5,000 comedians and 5 of them are good. Um, and, but that didn't happen with photography. It didn't happen with music. It didn't happen with lots of things. It's suddenly like there are millions. I mean, go on, go on Flickr, 500 pixels, Instagram, anything that's doing photography. The amount of great photography in the world is staggering. It's just staggering. And the ability of people to get good is also amazing. One of my best friends in North Carolina, who, worked at UNC, he worked for the state, he's retired now. He photographs birds in the wild. He is the best at it. I've not seen anybody better. He's the Audubon of wild birds, and does this unbelievable job. Self-taught, does a great job, goes out, goes into the swamps and the woods and shoots these things. And he never would have done that 40 years ago, right? But now he can do it because then where am I going to find a publisher? Where am I going to do any of this stuff? No, now he can do it on his own, and he can publish it wherever he wants. An interesting fact about my life is that by far the most popular thing I've ever done is photography. It's not speaking, it's not writing, it's photography. And the photography I do is entirely utilitarian. I like to shoot mostly stuff out of airplanes when I used to fly. But as a passenger, by the way, I was never a pilot. But um, and I probably have more photos in Wikipedia than anybody because I publish these things with a lot of links and I mean rather a lot of tags. I like to get small towns. I like geographical and geologic formations. I label them and then they show up in Wikipedia. And that's like a public service from me to the world that I do. I wouldn't have been able to do anything like that 30, 40 years ago. This is, it's an amazing time, but I think the problem we have so far is we've barely begun to touch what can be done on our side outside of the giant platforms. It's an open question whether or not we're always going to need intermediation. We're always going to need centralization. We're always going to need the giants. I don't think so, but I have not proven that. So until I or somebody else proves it, it will remain unproven, if not false. So I don't know.
What about tech monopolies? There's a lot of actually, surveillance capitalism and tech monopolies both are big subjects that are getting a lot of play right now, and
Yeah.
everybody is kind of confused about them, don't know what to do about them. What do we do?
Well, the the alpha geeks of the world will tell you all the ways you can be private that you're not going to do because it's a pain in the ass. So um, and it reminds me a lot of the Linux world when I was involved in it, which is, well, geez, all you have to do is you know install the right drivers and recompile your binaries and check your version dependencies and you're fine. And oh, by the way, you really got to learn either VI or Emacs so you can work in the command line. Um, it's kind of like that if you want real privacy, right? So my view on this is that here in the physical world, we were born without, our cultures had no privacy, and we invented it with clothing and shelter. Um, those are the original privacy technologies. We do not have either of those online yet. There's no clothing, there's no shelter. There's a little, if you want shelter, get offline. That's shelter. I mean, you know, or if you want to deal entirely in a fully encrypted way with the few other people who are willing to deal in a fully encrypted way at all times and in secret, you could do that. I mean, that's a doable thing, but um, that's for wizards. It's not for muggles. We have to have something that works for the muggles of the world, and which is the rest of us. And I'm far more muggle than wizard, which is why I've got 1,000 passwords I still need changing and stuff like that. But I
Back when
think,
I first met John Barlow, I remember him giving a talk. This was at a conference on computers, freedom, and privacy. And of course, he was giving a talk about privacy. And the first thing he said was that, well, I grew up in Pinedale, Wyoming, and everybody knew everybody else's business. So privacy is not such a big deal to me. And I'm surprised it's
yeah,
such a big deal to everybody else.
well, it's an open question whether we'll ever be able to get anything like the privacy we enjoy in the physical world in the digital world. That's one of the ways that the digital world is so new that we can't know it. It's kind of like, we've just kind of settled on base 10 math. Okay. So we don't have algebra yet. We don't have trig. We don't have calculus. That's not going to come along for a few dozen thousand more years now. We've got etchings on bonobo bones, and we haven't got much farther than that. That's kind of where we are. And I think we haven't found our way toward what Brian Bellendorf, who would make a great guest for you if you haven't had him already, calls minimum viable centralization. We always need something centralized. Of course, we need something centralized. But what you want are lots of ways to have setters deal with each other. So, for example, if I want to ship something to Austin, I've got a bunch of options, right? And I can send it to I can use FedEx. I can use the postal service. I can use UPS. I have reasonable faith that the systems in between, the freight carriers and so forth, all use different intermediaries. And the in the physical world, we've found ways to minimally viably centralize things, and there are points where things fail. I mean, all systems fail. One of our daughters is in charge of clothing production for a big one of the big clothing companies, uh, and she has goods going from China to Europe. Guess where those goods were for the last week? They were on a boat that was stuck in the Suez Canal, right? And a boat behind that one, right? And watching the effects cascade through retail all over the place. So I'm not sure it was going to Europe. It was going somewhere. Anyway, it was on the boat. and uh, but the thing is that, okay, Evergreen was one carrier. The people who sell the containers were another player in that. Whoever the company was that their company hired in order to stuff the containers with the goods. There were multiple manufacturers who've worked these things out. We do not have this worked out online so far. I think the one, it's sort of like we had something miraculous happen with peering. And the reason it happens because nobody, like the ITU wasn't around. None of the phone companies knew what the hell to do with it. Um, what happened was that TCP/IP became the way that lots of independent networks found the endpoints beyond those networks found to communicate with each other, and the various services in between said, we don't know how to build for this, but we're all big. Let's just all peer with each other. And that's what happened, and then they ate the costs of whatever went on in between, because there still were ways to make money. There are other ways to make money. So they made money in other ways. We're Comcast. Well, we're just going to charge people for cable television. Oh, now we're going to charge for internet access. In the meantime, we're just transporting bits between here and there. So, but peering was one of the things that allowed, it was a flexi point, and all of the exchange points basically became a system that allowed lots of different centers to operate. But at the content level, we haven't figured this out yet. And my guess is that we're always going to have movie studios. So somebody's going to pay multi-million dollars to people to make movies. And are we going to have theaters though? Maybe, probably not like we did. It's anyway, but it's still early. I mean, that's sort of my angle on it. I feel like I'm filibustering. Sorry.
The movie business, that has been, they've predicted the end of the movie studios for decades and decades. Every time a new technology came along, but some of them seem to have survived. But once again, it's happened to that industry. It's like it has to many others. The big ones all merged and merged and merged until you're down to just a very few players. And that seems to be the big weakness in the movie business, is they're getting so consolidated that there's not a lot of diversity going on there, which has been the case for a long time.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I happen to be at the moment in Los Angeles, or actually, or close to it. I don't know anybody in the industry, but the industry is still what everybody talks about here, because a lot of people are in it. And a lot of people were hurt very badly in the last year. We do know somebody who's like a key grip, is way down in the credits and at the ends of movies. Been in a lot of them. You can't go on location. You can't scout locations. You can't do any of that stuff. You can't put people together in a room. It's and how much are we ever going to do this again? It's a really strange and interesting question. To me, the sort of the bigger phenomenon is what's happening independently. The people producing their own shows. Like you mentioned before with radio, it's even bigger with media. With TV. I mean, I'm looking at, there's a piece there was a piece on the media, on internet culture, and I'm trying to think of the name of the guy, but I can't think of it. Anyway, he's a famous guy. He was like he's a kid. He's like in his early 20s. He's got a TV show that's on the net where he has over 1 billion downloads. Billion. You know, uh, my wife and I asked our 24-year-old son if he was familiar with this guy. It was like asking him, does he know what a selfie is? You know, I mean, it was a very old guy question to ask. This guy's totally well known. I had never heard of him, and he was gigantic. But there are many smaller ones as well. I mean, I ran across uh, online comedy done by these young women in the UK that are, oh yeah, her name is Stevie Martin, and like, not to be confused with Steve Martin. Just look up Stevie Martin. Funniest shit you've ever seen. I mean, she and her sister, who looks almost identical, like a twin, maybe she is a twin, and another girlfriend, do this, all these takedowns on the job interview, stuff that young people go through, the job interview, the stupid questions, psychological questions in the job interview. Lots of great stuff on privacy. On There's one she does that's the dialogue between a person and the cookie notice. You know, it's like a humanization of the cookie notice, and it's just brilliant. Uh, that's that's some of the best stuff on TV, you know, and I'll look at that, and then I'll go look at what happened in the opening to Saturday Night Live, and where that's good, and I'm always going to kind of like that. Frankly, Stevie and her friends are better, and you know, and they're not alone. There are a lot of those.
But what I'm
And
saying is the democratization of stardom,
yeah,
technology and the
yeah,
internet have taken away the old barriers. Before, you had to get into a certain office or get to a certain agency. Now you just have to buy the right gear and have some talent.
yeah. And also, where do you have to be? I mean, our youngest son is 24, and his girlfriend are are living in Brooklyn. Of course, is kind of required at first, you know. But it's like, oh, you're done with college. You don't want to go to grad school. Go to Brooklyn. Don't need to anymore. They're looking at where else in the country they want to go, right? Well, they can find places that are cheaper. They're living online, you know, when they're not going somewhere else. What do you want when you're not online becomes the question, and where can you go to get that? Um, that's that's a question in front of them right now, and that's, I mean, just imagine what's going to happen when the pandemic is truly up. Is the Manhattan skyline going to be filled with people going to the office anymore? Are skylines anywhere going to be filled with people going to the office anymore? Um, this is a little off your topic, but it's still a topic that's going to be really interesting. Is you know, what has the pandemic hit the complete reset button on, and what things has it done nothing to? And complete reset, or you know, like office real estate, working at the office at all, business travel. Um, I think in the long run, it doesn't hurt. It's actually not going to hurt the cruise business if it's still alive. You know, if it makes it through there, people still want to go on cruises. You know, if we're not infecting each other, let's get back on the cruise boat. Let's get back to going on vacation. Let's get back to going, you know, doing vacation travel. Um, but uh, but there are other things that just change forever. You know, that's, you know, the movie theater business that's changed forever somehow. Don't know. The restaurant business, I don't think so. I think the restaurant business comes back. Not the same ones, because a lot of them died, you know, but it's kind of like, who survived the plague? Oh, yeah, that was a good one. We'll keep that one.
I'm not sure
Um,
movie theaters actually go away. I think they maybe changed, become more like. I mean, we have um, a thing here in Austin called Alamo, and now there's Alamos kind of all over the country. And Alamo um, changed the experience of going to a movie. They serve, they can serve you a meal and they'll serve
right.
you
Yeah.
drinks and that sort of thing. But
They
they
got nice
also
chairs, they
have,
have real chairs and things instead of those movie seats.
yeah, and they brought a
Yeah.
bit of showmanship to it. They started
Mm-hmm.
having special screenings and that sort of thing. So they're actually they've sort of created a kind of Alamo culture that people really like, and people flock to Alamo. They don't necessarily flock to the traditional movie theaters, the AMC and
Yeah, yeah,
Regal and that sort of thing, but they do flock to Alamo because Alamo is not just providing a movie, but they're providing an experience. So I think that people talk about experience economy or experience as a product, and that's kind of where I see movie theaters going. And the other thing is like the IMAX. You can't really do the IMAX in your living room.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's I remember when Avatar came out, and I saw Avatar on in the theaters, and that was done in on I think on Sony cameras, but it was done in 1080p. It was done in 1080. It was 1K, and it turned out I remember we went to see it in IMAX as well, and an IMAX is not 16 by 9; it's 3 by 4. It's more like old fashioned TV shape, but it's right in your face, and it's a wall, and it's gigantic, and it's way up there. It in fact was exactly the same, only clipped at the sides. It was actually it was you were seeing less at the IMAX theater than you were seeing in a regular movie theater, but the wraparound sound and the experience of it was a much bigger one, right? You were like right in the middle of this thing. And I just think there's so much going on there. There's somebody whose work I commend. His name is Douglas Trumbull. He's
Oh
the
yeah,
guy,
I
you
know
know,
Doug
I
Trumbull
mean, but
well.
it's worth
Yeah.
looking him up. I've actually been to his compound in Western Massachusetts. He's doing stuff with 3D. He's doing stuff with 120 frames per second that utterly and completely changed the sense of realism in a movie.
He was one of the drivers of IMAX, as I recall,
He
and
was. I
he
mean,
he
he's
worked
so
on
original.
2001. He was
Yeah,
one
yeah.
of the effects leads there.
He was like 24 or something like that when he did 2001, and he got it by like showing up at Kubrick's door saying, "I could do this for you," or something like that. And he invented space. He invented what space looked like.
Well, a
That's
big player is Dolby still, and they're coming out with new
yeah.
replacements for the 5.1 and 7.1 sound that they've done for entertainment. And I've been keeping an eye on that. It's a more immersive audio experience, and I can't wait to to test that out.
Yeah, and it's so like players like that are just going to be huge, I mean, and you need a Dolby, you need a Lucasfilm, you need a, a Pixar division now of Disney and others that have the money to do it. But how much space does it take up? Um, the movie Happy Feet was done mostly, as I'm told anyway, in a bungalow rented out by people we know in Venice Beach, I think, or is it? I think that's where it is. Um, you can do these things in a relatively limited space, which is great gear. Here's an interesting thing. It's a little off topic, but not entirely. I made a really interesting discovery at a jazz club in New York. Um, and it was with my phone. I had dropped my iPhone 7 in a pool and it died. Um, and then I bought an iPhone 11, and this is it. This is my iPhone 11. It's now a generation back. And I was at this jazz club, and we were like it was a supper club, so we were eating there. And I thought, I'm just going to sneak and see how this thing actually sounds because it shoots in 4K. So I thought I'm going to just shoot this like a minute of this band in 4K and see what it looks like. And so when I listened to it with headphones, I didn't realize this. Apple has two microphones in this. There's a second one that's like right next to the cameras here. It's really good. The sound was unreal. And what's more important is that the distance between the two microphones kind of simulated the distance between your ears. And so there was a binaural, you are there kind of feel to it. It blew my mind. And nobody's making anything out of this. There it is. You've got your iPad, I see. Does it do the
Yeah,
same thing?
same thing. I had that same experience. I went and
Wow.
the little you know C adapters to plug in where I could use either a headset or
Mm-hmm.
earphones or whatever, and walked around recording stuff. And like, damn, that's nice. And the speakers
Yeah,
aren't all that. I mean, the early
they're
speakers
not bad. Yeah, and
were
actually
horrible.
on the iPhones, I know the 7 did it. I mean, you don't know you're getting stereo sound, but it does give you stereo sound because because the two speakers, the one at the base and the other one up by your ear in the ear location, actually simulate a pretty good stereo sound. We're just at the beginning. Again, we're kind of at the beginning of this thing. You know,
It
uh,
always seems that way.
it is. I mean, it's now is the beginning. It's the only one. For now, for now on. So we covered everything. I think you're on mute, John.
Oh. Yeah, we're getting close to the end here.
Yeah,
I'm
sorry.
usually better when I'm on mute, but yeah, we're getting close to the end. There were some other things I was going to ask you about. I think one thing I'll ask you about before we drop off. Do you know about NFTs?
I do. In fact,
What the
there's a
heck are
wonderful there's a wonderful onion. Let me see. It's that just came out. That's about NFTs. I don't know if it's on there now. Of course not. It's already rolled off. It's basically, there was the first NFT to be uh, to have vandalism on it done with a tool. So so anyway, it's not on the front. Anyway, but yeah, I know about NFTs. Here's Dave Weiner made a really interesting point about NFTs when he said, I'm not interested in the money. I'm interested in, and it's my term, but you'll know what it means, in the provenance of it. In other words, I just want to be able to take credit for what I did, and I'll make an NFT out of that just so um, you can say it was mine. I did that, or he did that, or she did that, right? I mean, that's an interesting thing. As for people paying, millions of dollars for, a digital original, the I mean,
the
of course,
hedge
one
funds
could.
are buying baseball cards.
Yeah, well, and it's not an artificial scarcity. It's a created scarcity. It has a scarcity of a sort, and people like scarce things, and they're willing to pay for scarce things, and then they have them, and that's fine. Um, it reminds me of there's a line in Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass where he says, I could turn and live with the animals. They are so placid and self to contain. Not one of them weeps about his condition. Not one of them worships another that lived long ago. And then he says this, not one of them is demented with the mania of owning things. And he wrote that at the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. And I think it was in many ways a brief against the rise of industry and a call for everyone to sort of remember nature while we still have it. But the mania of owning things is a distraction, I think, away from what NFTs actually can do. It's kind of like cryptocurrency is not as interesting as crypto. It's not as interesting as all the things that could be done with a distributed ledger, and there's so many ways to do a distributed ledger other than the way, say, Bitcoin does it. There's no need for the entire world's um, computers to be, or miners to churn up all the energy in Argentina or wherever, but there are better ways to look at it than that. There are better ways to do currency, and currency is an interesting topic of its own. How should we do currency? How do we make value, you know, um, measurable and exchangeable in some way? And I think we just touched on it. I think it's just the beginning of that.
Well, there's a lot of people who want to create the future, people like
Yeah.
predicting collapse, people like Jim Rutt with Game B and that sort of thing. And they
Yeah.
say,
Me
well,
too. I've been
everything's going
trying
to
to do that
collapse.
forever.
Yeah. So let's try to build this new thing, but
Yeah.
we can't all build the future. We somehow have to collaborate, we have to come together on it. And maybe,
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many clueless people right now. Maybe we need a new Clue Train manifesto for
I don't
this
know.
era.
It's an interesting thought. I've uh, uh, the that I mean, Clue Train stands up pretty well actually. After now
It
21
does.
years, it'll be in April. It'll be 22 years since we wrote the original. Um, I think it was so far ahead of its time. Oh my God! I mean, and it's funny, the one and only book that I've written entirely by myself, The Intention Economy, which came out in 2012. I was worried I was late with that. So far, it's 9 years early, uh, and it may end up being another 9 years before what I talked about there is going to happen. Almost all the companies I wrote about in it are dead, but then startups do that, right? Most of them
Yeah,
die.
absolutely.
Uh, I think, um, I mean, there's just so many ways. I mean, human beings are boundlessly inventive. That's just, to me, the most important thing is that we are this ridiculously resourceful and inventive species. Um, and I think, and if you want to see it at work, go to the poor parts of the world and look at people being resourceful. I found 4 mangoes. I'm going to sell them. I mean, it's just like people can be very, very, very inventive. And um, my father, who was born in 1908 and whose father was a carpenter and his grandfather was a carpenter. Joyce's dad too. He was, he grew up in a farm in Indiana. People who grew up in those circumstances can fix anything. They have to know mechanics. They have to know how things work. You know, give them some baling wire and a pliers, and they'll make something work. And um, I love the new car we have. It's a hybrid. I don't know what's going on under the hood. I don't know it intuitively. I far more enjoyed, frankly, driving an old stick shift, right? Where I could fix the car myself. I knew how to tear down a, a 283 or a 327 Chevy in the early 70s, right? I knew how to do that. I knew how to take down and put together a Volkswagen Beetle or a Squareback or a bus engine, and to get together with friends and a 6-pack or 2 6-packs and do that. And it doesn't mean I know how to do it now. I knew how to do it then, and other people knew how to do it better. But we could get together and do that stuff. And
now it's a software project.
now it's a software project, or you bring it in, and and it's full of the spyware and other stuff like that. I think you mentioned the spyware earlier. I think in the long run we do tissue rejection of as much of that as we can. I also don't think it's as leveraged as a lot of people think it is. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I think that we have reached the end of our hour, and this has been a fascinating conversation. Maybe you
We
could
need to
come
have you
back
back.
sometime and we could pursue some of those other threads that we left dangling.
Maybe we
Yeah.
could add some theses to your manifesto. I'm sure there's some that have cropped up that weren't
I
original.
think there are a lot I'd like to take out actually, because there were a lot of them was packing material, quite frankly. Um, but there it's an interesting thing is I think an awful lot of it wasn't understood. I think almost nobody, like, Clue Train was successful largely because of marketers, and it was an anti-marketing tract. It sold as a marketing book. It still does in 9
So funny.
languages.
Yeah.
And yet it's most people say, well, yeah, markets and conversations. Let's all kind of like try to talk at our customers, right? So it's, anyway.
Well, thanks so much, Doc.
Thank you, John and Scoop. This has been fun.
Enjoyed it.